Is your memory an asset for you? Do you know how to improve your memory when you need it? Welcome to Flow Unleashed. I'm Cameron Norsworthy, and this is your podcast for human performance. Today's episode explores one of the most fascinating frontiers in human performance, the power of memory, our attention, and how we can train the brain to perform under pressure. My guest is Dave Farrow, a 2 times Guinness World Record holder who memorized an extraordinary 59 decks of shuffled playing cards. That's more than 3,000 cards in a single sighting. But this conversation isn't really about having a superhuman memory. Dave's journey began with a very different challenge. As a child, he was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia, and he struggled to make his brain work the way he wanted it to. And that struggle led him to explore memory training, ultimately developing his own techniques and frameworks, including what he calls memory modes, which were later tested in a neuroscience study at McGill University. In this episode, we'll explore how the brain decides what information is worth remembering, why most people misunderstand how memory techniques actually work, a practical method to instantly improve remembering people's names, and the neuroscience of stress and why performance can shut down recall. We'll also take a peek into how ADHD traits can be reframed as advantages in certain environments, how David's system for sustaining deep concentration can help you in your day-to-day work, and the mindset that allowed him to perform under pressure at a world record attempt. It's a fascinating conversation about how the brain works and how we can learn to work with our brain rather than against it. So without further delay, let's dive in.
Flow Unleashed.
Welcome to the show, Dave.
Pleasure to be here.
Excited to chat with you. You've had quite an eclectic background, and from being I guess I'd call it a cognitive athlete, to starting your own business and so forth. Before we touch into maybe the second part of that later, how did you get into brain training and memory training and becoming a memory athlete?
Well, I don't really like the term memory athlete. I know there's a lot of people who, that became popular, but I never really thought that was the best use of brain training. I was diagnosed. So first off, for anybody who doesn't know, there are competitions of memory. So memory athlete is a real term. It's not made up or anything. I think it was like 600 people in the last one in Guangzhou, China. I'm an arbiter at many of these competitions. I've been doing it for so many years, so I'm one of the judges. Haven't done a judging for a few years now, but I'm still listed. And so lots of respect to everybody who does this. They compete in all sorts of events. I really got into this more to help people improve their memory, to study better, to really figure out the gray matter between their ears. So I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia when I was a kid. And I'm very ambitious, as you might imagine, as somebody who goes for a Guinness record, you'd imagine is. And those two things did not mesh well together. I just couldn't get my brain to do what I wanted it to do. So I turned to brain training and memory techniques, and I ended up inventing 5 new techniques and developing a syllabus for figuring out why memory techniques actually worked in the first place, called memory modes. And we tested it at McGill University in a double-blind neuroscience study. So it's really that sort of stuff that I'm most proud of. What really makes me feel good is the students that have come up to me that have had dyslexia or ADD themselves, but they've been able to, get into med school. Or I've actually just was talking to a good friend of mine who's a doctor today, and he says he wouldn't have been a doctor if it wasn't for my techniques. If you know anything about that, that's not idle praise to go to med school. The sheer amount of memory work is just immense. And when you know how your brain works, and you really understand it, then you really, I really wonder now why everybody doesn't know this and apply it to the real world.
Yeah, it seems like a basic school, especially in academia, that a subject that should be taught as part of the essential part of the syllabus.
And a lot of people misunderstand it. They think that visual association has to do with emotion or something like that, and that's not really the mechanism going on in the brain. So there's still a little bit of misunderstanding with the techniques. Some people think that, so I've had a lot of experiences where the techniques weren't taught properly, in my opinion, and as a result, they don't think the techniques work because they didn't work for them, right? It's a very personalized thing. There's something called the teacher bias we were able to uncover in our study, that if somebody does these techniques in a particular way, then they'll teach it that way, but there's several other ways to do it that if you're geared towards this other style, it just won't work as well for you. So we're able to prove that if people are using the memory techniques but using it with the wrong mode, there's 5 different ways of doing it. So if you use the opposite way, then you get a very moderate improvement in your memory. But if you use it the proper way, you get up to 3 times greater than most memory brain training. So it's still pretty new, it's still pretty young, but I do think that mnemonics will be part of basic education in the future, as it was in the past. Memory techniques were part of Aristotle's original academia, one of the first 8 courses in the first official school in the West. So we'll get back there.
Well, before we get onto it on this pod, hopefully you can train me a little bit and we can get a taste for what you do.
Sure.
Can we just talk a little bit about your world record attempts? Because I know I've helped other people do their world record attempts, and there's a huge process, huge energy, a huge vision that goes into it. What created that vision for you, and how did it occur, and what did you actually have to do?
Well, I really wanted to, I wanted to break a record that was very practical. So I wanted to go after what was still is considered the most difficult in terms of length and accuracy. So I decided to memorize decks of playing cards, which is very hard to fake. It's random numbers and symbols, so it's one of the toughest forms of information. And the record is the most number of decks all shuffled together in a single sighting without any repetition. And you have to get it accurate to 0.5%. I know I could say 0.5%, but the Guinness Book of Records literally states it 0.5%. And I don't know how that's any different, but you have to say it a certain way in order to get the record. So I broke the record when I was in my 20s. And then about 10 years later, I broke it with another 10 decks, and it still stands to this day. I've memorized a ginormous number of cards to get into the Guinness Book of Records. 59 decks of playing cards, all shuffled together.
59?
Yeah, so 3,068 cards in total, and with only 1 error.
Wow. That's insane.
Now, when I say that, you think that I'm some sort of Rain Man or something, but the reality is that I used a training method, and I also used a technique. It wasn't a different technique, but it was a different code, and it allowed me to memorize, essentially, if you know anything about memory techniques, as it sounds like you do a little bit, it allowed me to memorize about 4 cards for 1 link. So it allowed me to kind of compress the information. So literally, when you get up to the higher levels with human memory, you actually start to do what we've learned with computers. That is, if you want to store a lot of information, you have to figure out a way to codify it and compress it, and that gives you a huge advantage.
All right, well, let's dive in. Tell us how you did that. What's the method?
Sure. So it's odd because I'm of 2 minds here, because it seems that you do know quite a bit about memory techniques, but I want to first start with somebody who's brand new to this, and they've never heard of it, or maybe they've had a bad experience. So generally speaking, memory techniques work because there is a mechanism in the brain. This is the way I describe it. So, in the comments, if you guys have a comment section, I'd be happy to respond if anybody uses different terminology, but this is the way I've been teaching it for going on 20 years, so I'm pretty stuck in my ways. So there's a mechanism in the brain. It's around the reticular activating filter, and essentially it makes a decision to memorize something long term. Now, I've actually argued with neuroscientists about this. They don't believe that there's a decision being made, but I've seen enough data that I believe a real decision is being made. And the decision is made about whether or not this information that I am encountering is worthwhile to remember long term. And we've always been there. We've all been there where there's a joke or a YouTube video or something, you can't get it out of your head, but you try as you might to memorize something important. You go over it and over it and over it, and you can't get it into your head. It seems like there is another person that is in charge of whether or not that sticks. So what we discovered is that it is a survival mechanism, as you can imagine. And the survival mechanism, in my opinion, this is kind of my theory around it. The survival mechanism is to be able to detect things in our environment that are different. I call this term the tiger in the jungle. So if you imagine being 200,000 years ago and you're walking through the jungle and you see a tree and you see a rock and you see a little frog and you see another tree and you see a lake and you see a tiger and you see a little trail and you see the tiger's eating you by now because you have to pay attention to the tiger. In other words, when you look at a whole scene, you have to pay attention to what's different. That is the survival mechanism. So your brain makes decisions as to what is different and what is really important. I've done this with college students and stuff, had a whole row of apples. All of them were green and one of them is red, and everybody looked at the red one and they counted over to see how many would get to the red one. And it's in our nature to look for something that is what we call novel in neuroscience. So what we use in memory techniques is we take this boring everyday information and we trick our brain into thinking that it's novel. But here is the extra step that my program that we were able to show in our study, and that is memory modes. So different people think different things are novel. We have, if I were to teach everybody a technique, one of the games that we play, even with kids as young as 6, 7 years old, is we'll have a list of objects, right? 20, 30 objects. And each one we will take 2 at a time and we'll make a silly picture out of them, right? You have a dog and a horse. Well, the dog is jumping on top of the horse. And other people have the dog marrying the horse. And other people have the dog, you know what I mean? Like, all these kids are really creative and they come up with different things. So as it turns out, there's about 5 or 6 different ways that you can make these associations. One of them is to add action. The other one's to add exaggeration. The other one is to add personalization. The other is to add oddity, and the other one is fantastical. And oddity is something that is something's juxtaposition. So like that would be the horse riding the dog, something like that. And of course, action is obvious. You make them fight or something. Some kids would do that. It would work instantaneously. Personalization, you imagine you're riding the horse and you got the dog on a leash, something like that. So what we're able to do is we find out what your particular style is, and you actually just make all of the associations like that. The people who like action, they have all the items in their head, and they add all sorts of action. It's an action movie with explosions and everything. And these kids retain tons of information. The people who like a fantastical, that's like the horse starts flying, like something magical, something crazy, right? Exaggeration just means to exaggerate the size or the number of things. So maybe you have 1 million horses or you have a giant horse. And this sounds silly. It sounds odd. But there are really only a few ways that you can make these associations. And so when a memory expert was teaching how to do this, he would say, oh, add some action and make these things crash into each other or something like that. And about 30% of the people would like that, and the rest of them would be like, no, that doesn't really work, and they would think memory techniques don't work for them. Well, when you understand what triggers your brain, what triggers that mechanism to retain things long term, then you can do it for every single mental link that you make. And then we have a number of techniques to memorize, you can turn that into numbers and codes, memorize formulas, people's names. There's all sorts of fun mental gymnastics to do, but the fundamentals are that anybody can link up information in their head without repetition. It's just a matter of knowing your own personal style being taught the right way. I hope I didn't go over anybody's head there, because this is actually kind of high level. Like I take, in my online course, this is like day 5 or something. Like, this is not the first thing we talk about, but you seem to want to like get right down to the crux of it. And
this is great, because you know, a lot of information out there is around association, right? And I think people who have a certain level of interest in human performance, you know, we all want to improve our memory, and we all have heard about association, and being able to do it rapid fire as you might have to do with a deck of cards is obviously you need to train that muscle, if you like, to do that speedy. But it's
Yeah,
quite nice
so,
to get
well, the
some
thing is
categories
that
of association.
if anybody's tried to do visual association or just association, if you don't visualize things well, then you might have run into kind of a creativity block where you start, you overthink the creative part and it takes you too long to make these associations. But when you realize which ones actually trigger your brain, trigger your memory, then you just make the same association, same sort of style of association again and again and again, and it just magically works. It's like you're talking to this person in your brain that makes that decision, and it's going, yes, that's what I like. And when you know what your brain likes, you can trigger it again and again and again. It becomes very, very simple to do. So I've had thousands of people take my course who have been very disappointed by other memory techniques, and this is how we make it work. So it's just understanding. With anything, the teacher bias plays a role.
All right. So if you may, use me as a guinea pig. How would you work with me to improve my memory on a practical basis?
Sure. So what are your goals? Do you want to memorize people's names or?
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, I coach. I'm just thinking I coach my son's soccer team, and you got all these kids and the names kind of come in one ear, go out the other ear. And with unique names, they obviously stick a little bit more for me. But let's go with names. That would be, I'd love to improve that.
Okay, so one of the simplest ways to teach memory techniques is the basic names and faces. I call the costume party technique. It's very simple. You try to turn the name into a costume. And this is a lot less intimidating for people than the typical make a substitute word and phonetically, do different things. The key is just think of your first thought. That's also another mistake people make when they're trying to do this is they overthink the creativity. They think they have to think of the perfect thing. And the key is if it's your first thought now, it's going to be your first thought when you recall it, right? So Cameron, I would think of a camera. Now, I'm not going to walk up to you and call you camera, because that would be the first thing. Now, if I overthought it, I might think Cameroon or, a camshaft or something, you know what I mean? And then when I'm trying to recall, I would think, what is this mechanical motor thing I'm thinking of? And I can't quite remember the name, right? So just for people who don't know what I'm talking about, essentially the trick is the way you can walk into a room and remember hundreds of people's names is we're not actually remembering their names. We're coming up with a word that we can visualize. Now, this is even true for people who do not have the ability to visualize information. There's a small subset of population who can't visualize things. In those cases, actually, I imagine them holding these things in their hand or touching them, and we actually get the same effect. But for lack of a better word, we're going to use the word visualization going forward. And this, I mean, using all of your senses. So when you encounter someone's name, what you want to do is think of the first word that reminds you of the name, but that you can visualize. And when I say visualize, it has to be like a physical object. So my name's Dave. How tall is a Dave? How wide is a Dave? What color is a Dave? It's an abstract word that means nothing to us, and that's why it goes in one ear and out the other. But if the first thing I thought of that's in the physical object that reminded me of the word Dave would be something that rhymes, maybe I'd think of a wave, right? Or maybe I'd think of Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, and I think of a Wendy's hamburger, right? This would be for people who are in America and like hamburgers, I suppose. But I'm just giving a few examples, right? So whichever is the first thought for you, use that. And also use that every time you encounter a Dave. You might think you've got to be creative. I've got to be this creative genius and come up with a different one each time. No, use the same one. And yes, I give you permission, even if you thought of slave, go for it, whatever. It doesn't, the point is it doesn't have to be politically correct. It has to be the first thought that your brain thinks of, because in order to make this work, you have to kind of trust those synapses. One of the biggest reasons why we have terrible memories is we do not trust them. So we're not testing them. There's a great study on this, on note-taking. And they took a bunch of grad students and basically took away their ability to take notes. They couldn't type and they couldn't write anything, and they had to just listen to lectures. And then they compared that to people who were taking notes and also had time to study afterwards. And the test scores of the people who didn't take notes were as good or better than the people who did take notes. And the reason is if you rely on your memory, it will start to rise to the occasion. But if you don't rely on it, if you start to rely on everything else, then it will fade, right? And we're finding this with technology. I mean, I could go on a lot of tangents here, but everything from AI to Google search to just having all of our phone numbers in our phone without having to look them up or remember them. All of these things, relying on other things, have actually made our memories worse. There's lots of data on that. So trust your memory. And the first thing that pops into your head when you hear it. So a great one also is like my last name is Pharaoh. You could think of an Egyptian pharaoh. Obviously, I'm not Egyptian. It's spelt completely differently, right? But if it's the first thing that your brain thinks of, then it really sticks in your mind. Now, I was at a college. I was doing college talks in the past, and I would put on a little Egyptian pharaoh hat. I'm not so cheesy anymore, but I used to do that at one time, and people would remember my name for a good year or more after that. So the techniques really do work. So again, when you hear a person's name, don't look at them and try to think of, hell, what do they look like? No, listen to the word. What's the first physical thing that you could touch, taste, feel that reminds you of that sound, right? So Cameron, it's a camera. For Mike, it might be a microphone, things like that. And then you want to turn that into a costume. So the wave of Dave is I'm surfing, or a wave is knocking me over. The Pharaoh is I'm wearing the Pharaoh hat. Maybe Cameron, the first thing I thought of as a camera is like coming out of your eye like you're a cyborg, right? So you start to, with practice, you do have to practice this, you start to think of the first mnemonic that pops into your head. And when it comes automatically without you having to think about it, when you hear a person's name and you see a person and you immediately make this association, then you know you have a trained memory because it's second nature. And that's the key. It's just don't get in your own way. Think of the first thing that pops in your head, visualize that, and make that into the costume, and it'll stick in your mind.
Nice. Yeah, I think not trying to get in our way, probably the difficult part, especially when we're trying to improve memory. When we try to do anything, we tend to create unhelpful neurochemicals in this synapses. Like when you were talking through that, I originally had Dave from David and Goliath, and then Pharaoh, I was like Arrow. Okay, so then I started visualizing you in like a leather sort of pouch costume, and then you're pulling an arrow, and you're about to fire it at Goliath, and
sounds like a great Halloween.
Yeah.
And that's actually why we call it the costume party technique, because imagine if you walk into a party and everyone's wearing a costume, and then the following year it's Halloween again, you go to the same party, everyone's wearing different costumes, and you look at them and you go, okay, I don't know that person's name, but they were Superman last year, and I don't know that person's name, but they wore this last year, and you'd be surprised how powerful your memory is. It's just really good at connecting people to objects, not to sounds. That's essentially the problem. So that's the survival mechanism, is to connect. I mean, I'm sure there's a mechanism in that, connecting a person being able to remember that they, have a weapon or something, like, go back to our caveman days. That's probably why we have this mechanism where we're connecting visuals to each other. We go into a new forest clearing or something and we see like deer or something we can hunt, or we see a predator, or we see, some sign of them. Being able to pay attention to that, that's the survival mechanisms. The ones that did not pay attention to the tigers, they did not survive. They left the genome. So we are very good at paying attention to those visuals and tying those visuals together. The key is to not overthink it. Get right into that primitive brain and relax into it. I don't think these techniques are really a higher brain function. I think they are right down into the hippocampus and right down into the reticular activating filter, and they have more to do with instinctively recognizing things than they do with higher level logic and reason and all that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think when we go to that higher logic reason, we get in the way of that association.
Yeah.
Probably becomes an inhibitor. You talked a little bit about phonetics, like how important is it that it rhymes, like Dave and wave, as opposed to David and then David and Goliath? It doesn't matter whatever first came up, or is there?
Yeah, I think the Zen first thought is far more important And again, this is, people can disagree with me. Love to have an honest debate with people on this. I have reasons to believe this, but I think the Zen first thought is much more effective a technique than making preordained rhymes and things like that. And listen, I've done it. I make content giving examples. Hey, when you're trying to memorize, like swat a cop is how to say hello in Thai. Just imagine you're swatting a cop because he gave you a ticket or something. Like I'll come up with mnemonics and it's fun and most people will remember that and everything. But you want to go from those suggestions to doing it on your own, your first thought, because it has to be, because that's the one that you will think of, right? When somebody meets someone named Bob, some people will think of a bobber, a fish bobber. Other people will think of a bobby pin. Other people will think of something else.
Yeah. And then how important is recall? Being able to, with it, let's say I'm in a room, I've done a keynote talk, for example, suddenly 10 people are coming up to me. I'm trying to remember their name. And I've got to go on to the next one. So often I might do like what we've talked about, but then I've gone on to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And
in a practical sense, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't been stressed in a room where I'm memorizing a bunch of people's names and I'm stressed out, and yeah, I would go around the room and kind of review, make sure I got it and everything, and whether or not I need that review, it calms me down, so that certainly has a value. Absolutely. When memory meets stress, that is something that you have to really be aware of. So a lot of people are absent-minded, myself included. When I've been absent-minded, listen, COVID was horrible on me, and I had a lot of changes in my life following that I won't get into. But there's been times where I've been crazy stressed, and I can't remember a damn thing, right? And then I have to remind myself, no, I have these techniques, I have to calm down. But stress release cortisol hormone that directly interferes with your ability to connect your synapses together. So long story short, there's a lot of people out there who think they're dumb when they're really stressed, or they're overwhelmed, or they're multitasking or something, or people who think they can't learn anything when they have test-taking anxiety. Something like that. Or sleep deprivation is the other big one. I mean, we can go into a lot of different things. I try to make content to let everybody know, that like 9 times out of 10, if you can get enough sleep and you can lower your stress level and you can study something that you find interesting, or that you have, you're not like hating the information, not hating the process, you're somewhat into it, then you'd be surprised how you're a lot smarter than you think.
And from your understanding, how important is that recall from taking that information from short-term memory to long-term memory? I guess there's a lot of information
I would say that I would say, I mean, in a pure sense, with the right memory technique, you can memorize something once and recall it. I did it for 3,068 cards. Now, of course, I was reviewing it in my head. I'm not going to lie. But the recall is good to check, but the technique shouldn't need a lot of repetition. I've had lots of examples with students where they didn't have time to study their notes the night before, and they still remembered everything that they memorized in semester 1 months earlier. It starts to come back. Now, I will tell you, actually, I do have a couple of techniques for recall that you might be surprised with. They're things that people say I invented them because I didn't think that memory techniques really were complete. I felt like there should be techniques to improve your recall. So there's 2 methods that I use that I call shadow memory methods. And the first one is short-term and the other one is long-term. So if you've ever had a situation where something is on the tip of your tongue and you kind of have a mental block, right? And you're trying to remember it, one of the best things you can do is, first of all, slow down your breathing and look up. This is not so much a shadow memory technique as it is just a biohack. Looking up, we don't know why, but it actually improves your ability to recall something like 30%, a tremendous amount. And I mean, we've been in that situation. You don't have to take my word for it. Think of a time where you've tried to remember a note on a exam, right? And you stare at the page, you stare at the page, you stare at the page, you give up, you hand it in, you walk down the hall, you start rolling your eyes back in top of your head. Oh, what was that? And it pops right into your head. There's been so many examples. I was on the Steve Harvey show, and I kind of tricked him a little bit. His staff made me do it, where I went on, we started talking about memory, and then partway through the interview, I asked him, hey, what's my name? And they hid the cue cards, so he would have to use his memory. But he actually stood there in the chair, and he was hamming it up, and he was like staring up at the sky, and he was like curling his eyes up, and he went, I remember Dave Farrow. Like, it actually worked for him live on the air, which obviously was good for my book sales. So that's the first thing. Look up and slow your breathing, those two things, and they're more of a biohack. Another thing you can do is assume that you have the information in there. It's just not organized right. So ask yourself questions. This is the question technique. Ask yourself questions that you know the answer to about what you're looking for. So typical thing is you're looking for your keys and you forgot where you put them, right? So you ask yourself, oh, how many keys do I have on that keychain? And it makes you visualize it in your mind's eye. And you're like, okay, I've got like 5 keys there. And what color is the keychain? And you're staring at it in your head. It's black, but you're just asking yourself the question again. By asking and answering questions, usually about the second or third question, your memory will start to give you more information, because when you placed it down, let's say I placed it on my counter, I'm staring at this white counter, right? And I ask myself, hey, what color is it? My brain goes, oh, it's black, but it's on this white counter. Like, it knows the information. You just have to get around the mental block. It's kind of like getting out of your own way too, because you're, instead of saying, where is it, 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 you're saying, oh, how many keys are on there? What do I use that key for? Oh, I put it on the coffee table, right? And that's the feeling. The long-term shadow memory technique is a lot of fun. I had a great uncle who was in World War II, and he couldn't remember the names of some of the people he served with. And this was a technique that got him to remember that long-term, perhaps a blocked memory. And it involves the same sort of question and answer, but you use a journal this time. And I found the best results are when you write down the question that you want to know as you're going to sleep. And when you wake up, you try to answer as much as you can. And no answer is wrong. So he would say, I want to remember this guy's name. He was with me on such and such a date and did this, and he was blonde, and you remember everything you can. And then when you wake up, you remember conversations you had with them. You remember, where you traveled with them. You remember that he was married. You remember all this stuff. And then eventually the name is one of those things, because it's in there. It's just not organized. So, and those are the shadow memory techniques.
Nice. Is that along the same lines as the MacGyver technique, where you're asking the question, and you do something random, you take a shower. In other words, you're taking your explicit cognition off the subject in order to allow your implicit system to grapple with the
I see what you mean. Yeah, I've never heard of the MacGyver technique, but I'm a big fan of MacGyver, so that's a very cool thing. But yeah, I would say that this is a way, the mental block that we have tends to be when we overthink. And so let's go back to where the keys are, right? If I'm thinking, where did I put my keys? And I think that I put them here, but I put them there yesterday, right? Every time I think of keys, my brain is going to say that spot. Keys, that spot. The more I think of it, the stronger that memory becomes, because your brain doesn't care about truth. It's like the internet that way. It doesn't care that the keys aren't there. It just cares what is associated to the word keys, right? So in a way, you do have to distract yourself from it. That's why you ask yourself other things about the keys and other things that you know, and your brain goes, oh, okay, well, do you want this information or do you want this? It's kind of like prompting AI. You keep on prompting again and again different things, and then it just gives you the information you were looking for all along. So yeah, I'd say it's very similar to that.
So you've got your technique, you've practiced it, you're competent with it, and then you reach a scenario where the pressure does come. I've walked off the stage, I've got 10 people, you're standing there, you've got judges, and you've got 3,000 cards to recall. What was your process for not getting in your way, not giving stress that bandwidth, and allowing those techniques to kind of work in the moment?
You're really getting into some good questions. That's deep. There was a moment, the evening before I was on the air, I recalled my last record I recalled on Discovery Channel. And there was a moment where I just felt like I had blanked out on all of it, like it was all gone, right? And I had this panic feeling. And I realized that's for what it was. That was my amygdala being hijacked, and that was a chemical reaction. And adrenaline and, all the different hormones, norepinephrine and everything else flooding your system, it makes you temporarily stupid, for sure. What I do and what I did, I think this is a Stoic practice, is I went back to visualizing because I am a good visualizer, and I visualized, kind of pulled myself out and realized how much whatever I was focusing on really didn't matter. And the world was much bigger than me. And even if I failed, it was, amazing to try. There's a Stoic practice where you even consider failure. I think this is also in the Hakaguri, a practice for samurai where you meditate on death. You're like, okay, if I'm so afraid of dying, what's that going to be like? And the fact is everybody dies and everybody goes through that process. So visualizing and realizing, yeah, you're not special. People fail, people succeed, things happen. Not everything goes the way you want. And it is a real interesting, I want to say, it is a horrible trick of modern world that most of the things that we need to succeed at in the modern world are the absolute antithesis of really giving a damn too much. We have to be cool under pressure. We can't care so much. We can't get our heart too wrapped up in something if we're going to succeed. It really does have to be, you have to have that kind of poker face if you want to win the poker game. That is applicable to so many things. And I think it has to do with just the modern world. I don't think it's God testing us or anything, any nonsense like that. I think it's more like, if I'm in, a jungle and I've got a predator that's coming after me, the crazier and angrier and scared I am, the better. The more blood flowing through me, the more, adrenaline, the better, right? But if I'm in an exam room and everything's riding on this one exam, and if I have that predator response, if I care too much and I get so caught up and I get stressed out, then I will forget. So it is an interesting irony that when we seem to need it the most, our history, our evolutionary history, makes us forget when we need to remember the most. And we have to realize that our brain is a machine. It's running on old programming. It thinks we're a hunter-gatherer. If you ever don't understand why your brain does something, imagine if you were in a tent in the woods, and it would probably make sense, right? You're scared. Yeah, you'd be scared in a tent in the woods, right? There's dangerous things out there, right? And when you're scared, you don't need to do math. You don't need to be that smart. You don't need to remember German, right? Whatever it is, you need to have a pointy stick and be really intimidating because there's a bear out there or something. So I think there's so many situations where it is just our adrenaline going, and a Stoic practice of being able to pull away, realize that we're all mortal, realize that tomorrow's going to happen whether you like it or not. It's going to go one way or another, and your life is not going to end if it goes against you. Some days sometimes the beast gets you, and you just have to have that I don't care in some ways in order to succeed.
Yeah, I love that fear release, and that actually, so often we're in a modern era, like you said, we're dealing with outdated hardware, and then we face complexity, challenge, which involves cognition. But if we lean too much into that cognition and that higher order cognition and that thinking brain or that explicit cognition, it cuts off access to our memory, it cuts off access to our motor cortex. We respond slower, we think slower, we can't recall as much. And
well, the brain drug that is one of the most overused drugs in the Olympics even is beta blockers. A lot of people don't realize it. Also in symphony, people who are practicing musical instruments and trying out for an orchestra. If they have a little bit of adrenaline going, their violin will sound terrible compared to if they're calm. And they take these. I'm not suggesting this to anybody, but there are drugs that block that adrenaline, and I think, practicing and training your brain to not overreact is really also a good idea. But heck, I've been there. I've been stressed out more than you can imagine. So I wouldn't judge anybody. And I would say that that it affects even more than just memory and recall. It affects everywhere. If you're talking to somebody and you get stressed, your voice goes up, right? And you sound less credible. You're not believed as much. People think you're lying or dishonest, or you're not a good leader. All these things, all these subconscious cues. Just having a conversation with somebody if you're a little stressed out. Think about that. So I do think that we do have to carry around this understanding that our brain, it's not always our friend. It's not always doing the right thing. We have to understand it almost like a child. We have to understand why it's doing something. So stop hating yourself if you stress out. That's only going to make it worse. Stop thinking that you're panicking that you have Alzheimer's because you forgot where the milk is or something like that. Like the simple fact of your reaction can sometimes be worse than the reality of what you're dealing with. And focus on mindfulness, I meditate every day. I think that makes a huge difference. When I went through a huge life change, I was incredibly stressed out. And daily meditation was what helped pull me out of that. And I think we live in a world where we look externally so often. Everything's on our phone. Everything is in Hollywood, and it's almost taboo to just close your eyes and look inside. But that's where the mess is. That's our room. We got to get in there and clean it up.
Yeah, I love that. Love that.
Well, you're ask me questions, so you're bringing out. If these are good answers, it's because the questions are great.
Yeah. I'd love to dive into your experience with ADHD and dyslexia, if that's all right.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm an open book.
Nowadays, so many people are either self-diagnosing, and in some shape or form, I kind of feel like we're all on that paradigm, right? At some level, and
definitely in our modern age. So, like when ADD first came out, I got into a bit of trouble because I've been properly diagnosed ADD, but all of the data at the time was talking about a genetic connection. I agree with the people who say there's a genetic predisposition, not a genetic connection. That is, some people have a tendency towards this, but there is also a form of brain training involved. So back in the 90s, I'm a Gen Xer, when people were studying ADD, they also compared that to how many hours of television a child would watch each night. And something like over 2 hours, for every additional hour the child would watch TV, their chances of having ADD would go up by 10%. So if it's 4 hours, it's 20% more, 5 hours, 30% more, things like that. I may be misquoting it slightly, but the correlation was spooky. And I think that hits what we're dealing with right now. When I was a kid, the number of people with ADD was a small percentage, 2%, maybe 5% or something. And now you're looking at 30% or more that identify that. And I am not here to say that they don't have it. I do think, though, that they have a predisposition towards it, and habits, and especially interacting with social media, things like shorts and reels and stuff like that, just exacerbate it. So I have some techniques that can fight that. But one of the first is a daily meditation practice. Just if you can get good at calming your brain down, then you'll have control over it when you need it.
So what, in terms of training your brain to work with it, what are the functions going on there that you believe is occurring during ADHD that makes it, I guess, somewhat different, somewhat more creative than a normal brain, if there is such a thing?
Well, let's look at what are the traits of ADHD. And one of the biggest ones is, I think, a really good way to approach this is let's ask ourselves some questions. What if ADD wasn't a series of traits? What if it's one trait that is manifesting itself in a series of different ways? All right. And I believe the trait really has more to do with risk. So there are some people in a population, as with everything, it falls on a spectrum. There are some people who are much more comfortable with danger than other people, right? So if you have a group of people, let's say they're wired differently and they're very comfortable with danger, they're very comfortable with risk. That means when danger happens, they are calm. Other people are freaking out. Well, that's how ADHD people react, right? But then let's extrapolate that. Let's talk about one of the common traits of ADD is hypersensitivity. We're very hypersensitive with our emotions. This is absolutely true. I overreact to things a lot. But how are we overreacting? We tend to overreact at other people. That is, we look at how other people act as extreme. So if somebody is yelling and screaming at us, then we just amp it up and like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Well, I thought about this for a while and I thought, well, what if that was just the comfort with risk part? See, I was having an argument with my girlfriend at the time and kind of this dawned on me that like, if I were yelling and screaming the way that person is yelling and screaming, they would have to be the greatest enemy in the world. Like this is like Saddam Hussein and Hitler all put together. I would not yell and scream for something like just talking about eggs or whatever, like something ordinary, right? So when somebody reacts so extreme to what I would consider extreme, because I would never do that, then I overreact and I think, oh, they're breaking up with me, or it's the end of the world, or it's this horrible thing. You know what I'm saying? So I actually think that the fact that I'm calm under pressure makes me see other people who are not calm under pressure. They are very much freaking out, and I'm taking what they say and do as much more extreme than other people would, because I would never act that way. And I think that this correlates with a lot of other things. So, the ADD brain gets very, very distracted. If we're calm under pressure, well, when there's no pressure around, when there's no danger around, we are not calm. We're like distracted. We're bored. We're like, when's the danger going to come? Where's the adrenaline, right? And then we get used to that adrenaline and we, become bad at boring things, listening to lectures, sitting still, things like that. All of it, I think, comes back to the fact that there are some people in the society that are like that picture behind you. They want to be in that kayak in the rapids, and that's their comfort. That would make their heart slow down, and other people would find their heart slowing down when they're in a meadow somewhere. So that's the difference in nature. But when we get into the modern world and we start stimulating that, let's say I'm ADD already, and then I'm watching YouTube shorts constantly, which I was for a while, or I'm playing a video game or something, then I'm stimulating that and my brain is going faster and faster and faster. And then the normal everyday world just seems so incredibly boring. It's painful by comparison. That very much feels a lot like a drug that you can't help but pull yourself off of if you want to try to focus and try to accomplish something. So, a lot like addiction, a lot like any drug, some people are more susceptible than others. Some people are more sensitive to that than others, right? That's exactly what I think. That's where the nature, I think, comes in. We are, as ADDers, we are very sensitive to stimulation, to thinking very quickly, because that's what a adrenaline junkie wants to do, think quickly and accomplish something. And we are moving at that super fast pace, and when everybody else doesn't move at that pace, we get really bored, and it's very difficult.
And on that last point of getting very bored, often like a common trait is to get more plates spinning and create drama over here and have 10 things going on. How have you dealt with that? What are your...
Sure. Well, I'll tell you one technique that I used that became a whole focus course is called focus bursts. And this is something I came up with in the 90s, so it's not quite as old as the Pomodoro technique, but it's very similar, actually. I only learned about the Pomodoro, like 2010, something like that. So essentially, this is my theory when it comes to focus. When you're trying to study, let's say, and you're trying to read a passage or memorize a bunch of stuff, your brain gets tired very quickly. I always say your brain is the greatest computer there is. It just has a terrible battery. You get exhausted very quickly. And this is not a real exhaustion. This is an exhaustion that comes from from studying. Okay. So what's really going on is the brain chemistry, the hormones in your brain. Long story short, the good stuff gets burnt up and the bad stuff is produced, right? So we're using up all the dopamine and we're injecting a bunch of cortisol, things like that. So, and this is like neuroscience 101. I am not reinventing the wheel when it comes to that, but I think I was able to explain it really well if we think of it in terms of fight or flight. So if I have to study for something, if I have to do something really mentally taxing, I've only got maybe 5 to 8 minutes of like this super brain where I can focus on something. I can be really creative or I can solve a problem. And then after that, my brain is not as sharp. That's the way it is for everybody. And so what I do is I thought to myself, well, what if that was a fight or flight situation? What if, because fights don't last very long, what if that's a mechanism that our brains have to be exceptional for short periods of time? And because nature does not have marathons, right? Nature, if you see two animals fighting, 10 minutes later, that has figured itself out, right? One has won and one has lost or gotten away or something, right? So every altercation in nature is short. So your brain only needs to be at its peak focus or flow state or whatever you want to call it. It only needs to be there for 6 to 8 minutes. So what I did was I started to use a timer to treat studying the kind of same way I did boxing rounds, right? So I would be on, focused, intense. I'd have goals. I'd be memorizing, a bunch of stuff in a short period of time, about 6 minutes. And then I would be off and I would clear my head and I would relax. And that would be when my neurochemistry would rebalance. And then I would go back to it. And so I called these zones focus bursts. There's a burst of focus and a burst of relaxation. You trigger focus and you trigger relaxation. And you don't go up and down, you go on and off. Your brain is really good at being focused and being relaxed and not in between. If you are pacing yourself, if you're trying to study a little bit, if you're in the library, just reading passively, you'll remember 10% of what you read. But if you're incredibly focused in that flow state, then you'll have it. But you can't keep that up for an hour, right? So I use an interval timer. And by the way, I've taught this to thousands of students in colleges and high schools. And in every case, it dramatically improved their test scores. And it trains your brain to handle test-taking environment. It's really good for ADD people because it makes studying fun and interesting because it's a short chunk of time and there's going to be a break. So you got to be the laziest person in the world not to wait for that break. And and at the end of an hour or two, you're not tired. This is I'm giving away a little bit of a secret as to how I got my Guinness record because memorizing 59 decks of cards, I would do a focus burst for every deck. And then I would take a short break in my mind and then I would do another deck and take a break, do another deck, take a break. And then after like 5 or 10, I would do a review, things like that. And that is really the secret is you can't pace yourself. You can't phone it in. You can't do a little bit of a mental activity and you can't multitask, but you can be on 100% or off 100%. And training your brain to be incredibly focused and then incredibly relaxed, that is probably one of the greatest skills you can have. And this is why students of mine say that they use this techniques and allowed them to graduate college and all that other stuff. It's because that's the mechanism. That's how your brain, that's the manual that we should know about our brain is how to activate it and how to relax.
Yeah, I love it. When we learning to work with our brain rather than against, I think that advice is so important for everyone, not just people with ADHD, but there's, especially when we're training ourselves to be switched on, the quality is high and we're creating that neural blueprint to then operate in the same way later. How have you also, let's take bigger picture, life as a whole, how have you also learned to find a rhythm in life as a whole as opposed to having too many businesses going on and becoming overwhelmed? And is it that same approach where you might have a project and work on it intensely and then have a deep relaxation period for weeks, months, whatever? Have you found a sort of or maybe you haven't, but
No, actually, I'll be perfectly transparent. Yeah, no, I'm like a lot of ADHD. I got very creative and started multiple businesses, and everything was going great until, for me, it was COVID. During COVID, we lost revenue, and then I couldn't pay for some of the other fun projects I was working on. I had a tech startup, a robot that I was building, and I have I have a bunch of rental properties, so I do real estate, and I also run an agency and do speaking and things like that. And it was great as long as everything was great. But when the music stopped and I was holding the hot potato, it was very stressful because I had to go back to fundamentals. And the way I got through that is, first off, figure out what is your revenue source, what is your greatest revenue stream, and focus on that. And yeah, it really is having the discipline to say, you know what, I want to work on that shiny thing right there, but I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to create my lab. I'm not going to 3D print anything. I'm not going to do any of that stuff until I write about 500 emails and do this other thing over here. And then, you got that task to write all those emails or everything. Then I just focus burst. I chop it up into 6-minute chunks and take it one at a time, and then it's done. And it is a really important lesson in patience, where if you try to do everything, you'll do nothing well. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do a lot of things, right? I still run several businesses and I love it. And I will also say having all those income streams and all those businesses saved me during COVID. Having, I'm not, how can I say it? I'm very privileged, and I'm acknowledging that privilege if anybody's curious about that. But during COVID, it was illegal to evict people, and I had a few tenants that just stopped paying, and they were buying big screen TVs and brand new cars with the money that was supposed to be going to the mortgage. And I nearly lost all my real estate because of it, because I did not have the cash reserves to last for 2 years, right? Nobody did. Nobody thought of that. But the fact that I also had this agency and I could do a few speaking gigs and I could make money in other ways and I wasn't relying on one thing really did save me. So I know a lot of people say when it comes to making money, pick one thing and just stick with it. But, sometimes you pick one thing and the market shifts or a regulation changes or your competition comes in and that one thing fails. So I do like the idea of having a few things that diversification. I do like the idea of doing a few things, but don't do too many, and do one thing at a time and focus on it and get it done.
We're rapidly running out of time. We might need another Guinness, but I just want to sort of touch on 2 more points. One, speed reading.
Guinness? Ever since these guys gave me a record, I kind of, I just love the taste of it.
Do you get free Guinness for life?
I do not, but I'd love that.
That should be one of the stipulations.
The number of people trying Guinness records then would just skyrocket, I think. Yeah,
it's true. Yeah. Well, that's their marketing done for them. Speaking of marketing, like you talk a lot about PR and using that to boost your business. How do you work with PR in your businesses?
So I never intended to become a PR guy, but yeah, I run Farrow Communications, and we're a full-service PR and marketing firm based out of Buffalo, New York. And we're not hiring right now, but please send resumes to the website. So after I got the Guinness record, I started getting publicity. And long story short, even with a Guinness record, I couldn't get publicity unless I had something newsworthy. So after I got the Guinness record, I was famous for about a week, and then crickets, got nothing. So I became obsessed with how to get publicity because it was, free advertising for my business. And the formula essentially was to find a demographic, was women, millennials, Gen Z, something like that, and then find a trend that's going on with them. And to have myself or our clients become an expert that can help that situation. So we do this all the time now, but in my day it was like if any celebrity forgot something, the memory expert can help them, or there's new understandings in neuroscience, or there's kids returning to school after the summer break and how to boost their memory. So I would find all these situations and get publicity for it. And it led to being featured in over 2,500 interviews and being a spokesperson for Sony, and just like some of the things behind me, like that's the Today Show. And I've been on all these things. So I was just doing it for my own business. It led to about $8 million worth of memory courses being sold, right? And a bunch of other, really, really cool things. So after you do that, a lot of people who are authors, a lot of people who are entrepreneurs came to me and said, hey, can you do it for me? And I started offering advice, and then I hired people, and I created an agency where we get publicity for small businesses, mid-sized businesses, and sometimes large ones too, and authors as well, and experts, speakers, that sort of thing. So the formula is, the understanding is actually that nowadays journalists are doing the job of 3 people typically, and a lot of them are freelancers. So people who are writing for entrepreneur.com, they're also writing for Business Insider perhaps, and things like that. So if we want to get their attention, we have to show that, we want them to do an article on our client. If we want to get that to happen, we have to show them, hey, there's data. There's people searching for this topic. This is a trend. This is something that's happening. Social media, on Instagram, they're searching for it. Talk to our expert, and we essentially kind of make a story and wrap it up in a nice, neat little bow. That's what we get paid for. And it works. We have guaranteed PR results. In as little as 3 months, we can get some major media for our clients. And it's earned media. It's real stuff. It's not just paper play. It doesn't go away. It doesn't get archived. And it makes you famous long term and leads to some great deals, like a great publishing deal and everything. So if any of your followers are interested, I do offer a free discovery call. If anybody wants to mention this show, I'll do a call to talk about publicity for you and your business.
Mm. So one of the main, I guess, wins you've had there is showcasing the need, making that very clear and simple to the media outlet.
Yeah, I don't know if this matters to anybody, but looking back on my life, this was not a strategy I did on purpose. But looking back on my life, I've encountered a bunch of challenges like ADD and I couldn't remember anything, right? Or something like that. And memory techniques solved it for me. And then I thought, well, if this helped me, maybe it'll help somebody else. That's, long story short, that's been my mindset. And then when I got into PR, it's like, well, I did a bunch of PR and I made some money that way. If this helped me, then maybe it'll help somebody else. And that has been the strategy this whole time, is figure yourself out, figure out what works for you. And then if you honestly do have a unique take on something, like I never wanted to get into memory techniques if I was just rehashing other people's stuff, but I had invented 5 new techniques and a whole method for ADD and focus. And I thought, I really do have something unique and I want other people to know about it. That's where the passion comes in, and you can speak honestly about it. If something's helped you, then you have an obligation to help others.
Nice. I'm sure that thread has kept that passion and that fire burning towards your success. All right, one last topic before we do some closing quick questions. Speed reading, right? Most people, unless you're a proofreader or an academic, or even that, I'm an academic and I need to read fast. We all want to know how to read faster. What have you learned there?
Yeah, speed reading is real. I think it should be referred to as sight reading, where you do exercises to trick your brain into reading by sight and not sounding things out as much anymore. There's a couple of principles involved. One of the things is that your brain does not have any set way that it measures speed, right? So we think of speed reading or reading speed, right? But your brain doesn't have an altimeter. It doesn't have any sort of measurement that is objective. It's all subjective. And here's a great example. Let's say you're driving down the street. Let's say you're driving on the highway and you're driving at, Mach Jesus, like whatever speed is fast for you, right? And then you pull off onto a side street and you're forced to go slowly, that feels agonizingly slow compared to where you were just at, right? And it's only feels slow because you were going fast before. When you left the house this morning, that did not feel slow, right? It's the same thing with reading. So much of your reading speed is subjective. If you do some exercises so we do an exercise in our speed reading course to essentially pretend to read really fast, right? So I've got my book here, and I normally read like this. Well, what if I just make my eyes go over the words like twice and 3 times as fast? And I do that for 5 minutes, take a break, do it for another 5 minutes, and let's say I do like 4 or 5 of those reps and sets. Then when I go back to reading regularly, my regular reading speed has increased just because of this subjective feeling. And there's no known or no noticeable decline in comprehension. So a lot of it is that you're capable of doing this, and you've gotten into a lot of habits. We've gotten the habit of sounding everything out when really your eyes can usually recognize words without sounding them out.
Yeah, we build categories, and often when we're reading fast, we're not even reading the individual word. We're pattern recognition and moving on.
Yeah, a lot of it is our past habits. We're sounding things out because that's what we did when we were kids.
So just continued practice of reading fast, like pushing those limits and then coming back to a pace that feels right, but will naturally be reading faster.
Well, my advice is to take my speed reading program. You can find it on brainhackers.com. But the second best option, is to do like sets and reps, tricking your brain into reading fast. Just do the physical activity of reading, like try to read far faster than you're comfortable with. And then when you go back to your regular reading, like it's an on and an off. It's not a slow ramp up. It's just go way too fast. Then when you go back to your regular reading, your brain will be like, oh, this is slow now. Let's go a little faster. And it'll be just very comfortable for you to go faster. The other thing is to practice with fiction books, with something that you enjoy reading. That's a really important one. Don't try practicing with textbooks. And another thing is practice by using your finger. So when you're reading, you pull your finger across the page. That's really important because your eyes respond to movement. If you try to do speed reading without using your finger, you're actually going to give yourself a headache, to be honest, because your eye muscles are going to fight against each other. So smooth eye movement, rapid reading or faux reading, and a couple of other techniques in there. It's all actually in my book. Actually, I talk about all the secrets in there. You don't have to get some big complex course. It's just get back to the fundamentals. There have been a lot of people who have kind of scammed people or something, saying that speed reading, that you can read at 8,000 words a minute, or you can scan a whole page in 2 seconds. And listen, one of my best friends, Howard Berg, Guinness record holder for speed reading, and he could read a page in about 2 seconds very well. And I was my peak has been around 2,000 words per minute. So I took about 4 times as long as he did, and he really did it, but he built up to that. So it's possible, but it's not something you can jump right into. It is a skill that you can get. So a lot of these courses that there was something called photo reading, which is mostly hype, in my opinion. But real speed reading is possible. It's just sight reading.
Yeah, it's interesting. In sport, let's take tennis, for example. When we're trying to improve returns, we'll get the server to stand at the service line instead of the baseline, hitting the serve twice as fast, or the oncoming balls coming twice as quick. And then until there's a level of comfortableness with that speed, and then they go back to the baseline, and then you hit a normal return, and you feel like you got loads of time.
Well, actually, yeah, this is the mental version of when baseball players grab a baseball bat that has a weight on the end and they swing it, and then they drop that bat, grab a regular bat just before they get up to plate. They get something like 30% more power out of every hit. So it's a mental trick because everything that we experience is subjective that way.
All right, a book or a film that had a huge impact on your life?
A book or film that had a huge impact on my life. Well, for book, I'd say The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles. I really liked that, especially where it talked about the competitive plane versus the creative plane. It kind of helped align what I wanted to do. Didn't think about that. And a film that was really powerful. My favorite film is probably still Casablanca. It's one of the best movies ever made, in my opinion.
Yeah. How come?
It's got to be one of the best stories, especially in the end where the main hero wants the girl to be happy more than he wants to have her. I think that's true love. I think that if you know the story about Casablanca, they were hiding out from the Nazis and they're trying to get a visa. These guys got these fake visas. There was only 2, so he could have gotten on the plane with her and he didn't. And because since they had known each other back in the day, she was with another man who was actually a leader of a resistance and everything. So so Rick did the right thing, not the selfish thing. And I thought that was really beautiful, because so many other romance movies would have the main character walk away with the leading
The Hollywood
lady.
ending.
And they did it. I thought they made him be a better man than that.
Yeah.
That's just my take. Now there's a whole bunch of people watching. They have to watch Casablanca now because what was this movie? It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Time to flip the mic.
And lastly, a question for myself to reverse the hot seat.
Well, my big question is, what do you really want out of life? What are you here for? Be honest. Beyond this podcast, this show, this interview, beyond any of the other work that you're doing, making a living, that sort of thing. What do you feel that you're here for?
In a nutshell, to experience. I love that analogy where our consciousness is all part of one big cloud and we come down as raindrops and we experience where we land and then we join the cloud again. And my purpose in that essence is to experience, and the richness of that experience, or the quality of that experience, is hugely important to me. And I think that's why I've been fascinated in flow. That's why I've been fascinated in so many scenarios that are towards the quality of subjective experience.
Well, if you want to make the most out of life, you have to know how the machine works, and you're the machine.
Yeah, that's it. And so often that quality of experience becomes limited by our brain, becomes limited by I call them the evolutionary errors that we carry with us, or with the external environments. And I spend a lot of my time trying to disentangle the external distractions and conflict, and disentangle the internal conflict, also we can get a rich experience on a moment-to-moment basis. And from a professional setting, that has come out in my coaching and my writings and my fascination with trying to help other people find flow. But from my own personal experience, I seem to be gravitated to sports or events or scenarios that just have that rich experience. So hopefully that intelligence gets carried through, but for myself, it's certainly that resonates. And then now having kids and a family, having that connection with that rich experience almost feels like another dimension to that feels very purposeful.
You're absolutely right.
How about yourself?
Oh, for me, well, I'd have to say, when I was a kid, I was very sick, and I died and had to be resuscitated twice when I was very young. And knowing that, it kind of gave me a perspective of kind of that death is right around the corner. If that doesn't sound too, obviously, that's the definition of sounding morbid, of course. But I took it as a feeling of, like, while I'm here, I want to do something important. And essentially, my answer would be I want to achieve self-actualization before I die. I want to, become who I believe I am before I'm done.
Mm.
And I'll let you know if I get there or not, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, often I feel self-actualization, if we take the spirituality out of it, can be the actualization of our capability that we can experience in moments every day. And perhaps it's more of a journey than a destination. But I just want to highlight and echo that the importance of actually not purposefully having a near life-death experience, but if not thinking, like you talked about earlier, thinking of death and actually realizing how life is so short. I've been
Well,
held
I would
at
actually
gunpoint
add to that. I would actually say that I believe in Dharma, which is a different way to define destiny. So we think of destiny in the West as either this top-down, God tells us you're going to do something like, David and Goliath or something like that, or I'm radically individual and I'm going to go, charge forward and do something. But in the East, in India, the concept of Dharma refers to, for lack of a better word, having the right skills in the right place at the right time. If there's somebody drowning and you're on a boat and you have a life preserver, the little rings, right, lifesaver, then your Dharma, your destiny is to throw it to them and save their life. Whereas that's not the person whose destiny it is who's still sleeping in a cabin downstairs, right? So that this is kind of where, I never intended to be a PR guy, but I want to give people who deserve it, I want to give people publicity and get them exposure so they can run their business and do well. And with the memory techniques as well, I wouldn't say that it's my biggest passion in the world to teach memory techniques, but I am here, and I think that's the place where I can do the greatest good. And so that destiny is partially something it's not always up to me.
Awesome. I'll let that thought linger for people. Thank you so much for your time, Dave. The biblical character who's firing arrows at me at the moment.
There you go. Thank you very
Awesome.
much. Don't forget me. I won't forget you. And if you'll allow it, go pick up Brain Hacker or go to brainhackers.com and find out more. I'd love to continue this conversation.
Absolutely. There were many insights in this conversation for me, but 3 ideas in particular stand out. First, memory is not fixed. It's trainable. The brain naturally remembers things that are novel, visual, and meaningful, which is why techniques like association and visualization can dramatically improve recall. I've used them myself and with many studying for exams. The key is discovering the type of association that works best for your brain. Second, stress is one of the biggest blockers of cognitive performance. When we experience pressure, the brain's survival systems take over. A flood of adrenaline and cortisol may help in a physical threat, but it can disrupt recall, decision-making, and our learning. Learning to regulate stress is therefore a fundamental cognitive skill. And lastly, high performance often comes from working with the brain's natural rhythms. David's concept of short bursts of intense focus, followed by deliberate recovery, highlights a powerful principle. Our brains become best in cycles of deep engagement and then relaxation, rather than prolonged low-intensity effort that many of us do day to day. Together, these ideas or points point to a simple but powerful truth. Our brains are incredibly capable when we understand how they work. Thanks for listening to Flow Unleashed. If you want to learn more about flow, I've recently published my book, How to Find Flow, with Blink Publishing. In it, I guide readers through Ready, Steady, Flow, 3 simple steps for high performance, resilience, and personal well-being. You can find the link to my book in the podcast description. If you like this episode, please subscribe, and the next episode will effortlessly drop into your playlist. Bye for now.